This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends, and we're in Ada, Oklahoma, and I'm visiting with Mrs. M.P. That's P like in Paul. M. Why don't you tell me what M.P. stands for?
Marvin Pierce.
Marvin Pierce Hatchett, and your own given name is
Bessie M.
Bessie M. And your maiden name?
Name was Chanel, or Chanel.
Spell it.
Chanell. I always say I'm Chanel #1, not #5.
Great. Why don't you tell us who your genealogy has been one of your hobbies, and I don't want to go to the long genealogical line, but why don't you tell me who your parents were and where they came from and how they happened to come to what was Indian Territory, I believe, at that time.
Correct. That is correct. My father was Henry Thomas Chanel, or Chanel as they call it in some places. He was born in Wayne County, Tennessee, but as a 14-year-old boy came into Arkansas, and then when he was 19, he came to what is now Howe, Indian Territory. For a long time, he worked in the mines as an engineer, and later he went into business, into a store, and moved to Wapanucka. From there, he went to Bromide, 1914. He got his degree in pharmacy and was a druggist. At the time of his death, he had been a druggist in this state for close to 50 years. One thing about my dad I'm especially proud of, he was on the board the day Oklahoma became Oklahoma, and he never missed sitting on the election board until the day he died, literally the day he died, and he worried that morning because he couldn't go down and sit on the election board.
And that was what year he died?
He died in 1950 in Ada. Dad came to Oklahoma first because his father had come into this state. My grandfather was married to an Indian. He was my father's stepmother, and had come into this state in 1883 on one of the lesser runs, and had settled in what is now Johnson County. And that's why Daddy moved to Wapanucka, to be closer to his father after my mother died. My mother was born in Lonoke County, Arkansas. Her father was a minister. He was Reverend Samuel Houston Parker. And her mother was a Waddell, Mary Elizabeth Waddell. And both families were up from Georgia into Arkansas. My mother came to Indian Territory to visit her sister, Mattie Leaster, and Dr. Leaster was a doctor to the Indians in and around Howe. They married in 1900. I was born in 1901 in Howe, Indian Territory.
Your father then he was with the mines, in the mines when you were born.
Right. That is right. He was associated with the mines there in Howe.
He actually took his pharmacy degree rather later in life, than normally, isn't that right?
That is right. Dad had a accident at the tipple where they washed the coal, and so he left work and went in first as a merchant in Wapanucka. He didn't like dry goods business very much, but he and my Uncle Noy Chanel owned the Chanel Brothers store in Wapanucka. It was a big two-story building built in 1910. And then while during the years 1910, 11, and 12, he went to Norman to get his education in pharmacy, and then went in 1913 into the drugstore in Bromide. My stepmother is called the Sage of Johnson County. She lives in Bromide still, and everybody turns to Mrs. Chanel to know the history of that area down around Tishmingo. She belongs to the Johnson County Historical Society. I got interested in genealogy because in 1904, when my mother died, I was taken back to Lone Oak, Arkansas, and began living with my grandmother there. In 1905, I went with my Uncle Frank Leister, who was the doctor to the Indians, to Buckeye, what is now Buckeye, Arizona, and lived 4 years on the Indian reservation. Then I came back when I was a little past 8 and entered school in Lone Oak County, Arkansas. Graduated there from high school. I came
In Lone Oak County?
Arkansas, in Lone Oak, the town.
In Lone Oak, Arkansas.
Mhm. Then in and every summer I spent with Dad because the law said I did, and I did. And in 1918, I came to Ada first and lived with a family named Lawson. Ms. Effie Lawson taught in the schools here for a good many years. Taught music here, and I lived with them and went to school here then until I got through college, got my A.B. degree
Where did you get your A.B.?
at East Central in 1924. Actually, I started teaching in 1924, and I picked up my degree on summer's work in 1925.
Why don't you describe the college as you first remember?
Well, so many people here, of course, know the school quite well and all of its history, and you'll probably hear this many times. Mr. Hatchett was teaching here when I came up here, and at that time we had the science hall, and we had the horseman hall, and we had a great big barn-like gymnasium that we had classes in, overflow classes. Sometimes we had classes in the schools in the summer, in the different schools in the city. And after Mr. Hatchett and I married, which was in 1928, I taught overflow classes at the college for about 7 years every summer. But I didn't go back to teaching until 1937, and then I taught for 28 years. Mr. Hatchett retired from, he was head of the biological science department here, and incidentally taught a little bit of everything else when he had to. He taught Mr. Herndon. He taught Herndon geology, for instance, and he was just talking about it a few minutes ago. So a lot of people here still remember Marvin P. Hatchett as a college professor. I taught 2 generations out at Van Noss. I taught a good many men and women, and then later, boys and girls, and then later their children in high school. So together we taught a good many years in this county.
What were some of the outstanding remembrances that you have as a teacher, some of the events that you've been?
I would like to mention some associated with Mr. Hatchett and the college. One time we had a circus that wintered here every year. They had an elephant that had killed a man. They decided to kill the elephant, and they presented it to the college. A lot of people remember the big old elephant skull that was up in the college, the science building. Another time, way in the night, we were called, and someone said, if you would like to have a zebra, you can come out and get one, that the little zebra had died while they were in training for the next trip. We went out about 2 o'clock in the morning, and between 1 and 2 o'clock, and they presented us with a little zebra. We went on up to college and worked the rest of the night preserving that zebra. During the time when so many of us had a hard time making a living, the people in Ada, especially the people, well, all of the people in town, would give a turnip or a potato or whatever they had, and we would put it in a pot, and we had bread line in Ada, believe it or not. We fed a great many people hot soup and bread. So I remember that. But digging up maybe the great mammoth was one of the early memories I have of college here. It was a huge thing, of course, or it wouldn't have been a mammoth, and we dug it up, or the science department dug it up, close to where the Lattice School now stands. I think those were outstanding memories, other than just the hard work we did in school. The college steadily has grown until it is now a university, from 3 buildings to, I haven't counted them lately, but we certainly have grown over this period of time. Many of the trips that the classes made, of course, stand out in my mind. In those days, we could go to Devil's Den and camp, or down Pennington and camp, or just almost anywhere. Because of my interest in the California Trail, I did a great deal of research on it, first and last, and have made a great many pictures along the route. I know where it comes in, close to Allen. The Marcy and the Gold Seekers stopped at the Osage village. We had that marked. The Historical Society had marked that quite some time back, but someone stole the marker. From there, they came on pretty close to where Highway 12 now runs into Ada. They split before they got to a little town called Hird, H-I-R-D, or Herd, so many people say. Part of them went south to what we call Aloso now, and came up to the point of no return, up the escarpment, where close to where the cement plant is, and they camped there on Delaware Mound. They joined there, and right southeast of the city library, there was a series of springs bubbling up at a fault face. And they came there to bathe, which is very strange, but it's described in some of the books of the time, especially Marcy and the Gold Seekers. From there, they went to Chimney Hill. There, they camped for close to a week, and the wagons were mended. From there, they turned rather abruptly, as you can see from this map, and went out of this county. But the DARs, the Daughters of the American Revolution, hoped to mark again where they came in close to Allen and where they went out. And the, of course, California group went on west until they got to Santa Fe and then on to California. I have traveled the trail from Ada back to Fort Smith, where they originated, and then from Santa Fe into Ada. But you don't travel all that trail. You have to parallel it because much of the trail is under fence or has been destroyed. Incidentally, the wagons went over what is now the Great Lawrence, where they get the cement out of Lawrence. So there, of course, the trail has been just completely eradicated.
How much of this trail can you see, actually see?
Actually, from the air, maybe part of it, maybe quite a bit of it. But if you're traveling, you just have to watch your maps, and it is marked fairly well in western Oklahoma, and then on farther west. We have only 3 markers between Fort Smith and McAllister. We had the marker at the Osage Village in this county, and that is just about it. The trail has not been well marked. So to say that you literally know you're on it, you would have to be a better engineer than most of us are. But with the maps and the historical atlas of Oklahoma and other states as well, you can follow pretty closely where it was.
When was the California Trail first broken?
First broken?
When did they first start traveling this California Trail?
Actually, we wouldn't know that because Marcy brought them over on an Indian trail. The Indians had used it much before he had decided to take the people to California. So the trail was an old trail when Marcy came over it. But Marcy's first trip with the 3-mile-long wagon train was in 1850 and the second in 53. So many of the people going to California went either the southern route or they went the northern route. And by that I mean a great many of them would come all right to Edward's Store over in Hughes County. But they would stay north of the Canadian River, and then they run into a great deal of trouble. Marcy picked up at Edward's Store before he crossed the river at close to where Allen is. Black Beaver, an Indian guide, and Black Beaver was a Delaware Indian and quite aware of this region. In fact, the Indians came here every year to drink the mineral waters that seeped over close to where Latta now stands, and he knew the region very well. There is a good picture of Black Beaver in the museum at Kingfisher, if you're interested in seeing what he looks like, and another one in Clinton. So there are pictures of Black Beaver, who was full-blood Delaware Indian that guided people across Oklahoma in the early days. So he was the guide across our county.
And he was also credited with breaking the lower portion of the Chisholm Trail.
That is correct. That is correct. Because he did lead a great many trains of a great many different white men across the state. One of the interesting things I'm trying to do right now is to find out how many sons and daughters of Revolutionary soldiers are buried in this state. We are told we have one in Pontotoc County, but I'm still hunting. I don't know. But in 1928, there were still 17 daughters of Revolutionary soldiers in the state of Oklahoma, one of which was here in Pontotoc County, and her name was Cravat. So that is right now bugging me. I've got to know, got to see how many of those I can find.
How do you go about finding those?
Well, the Chronicles of Oklahoma might be called your lay Bible in finding out historical facts. The state has been written up nicely. I did a little research last April when I went to Washington, D.C. to National Congress of the DAR. I am going to do some further research this April. When I get there, I will go to Smithsonian and the Library of Congress and to, of course, the archives. I'm hoping that I can find more than one Revolutionary soldier buried in our state. It is said that one is buried here in this county.
Do you know who it's said it is? This person is?
Well, he's supposed to be a Mr. Tyler. A Mr. Tyler who used to live in Van Nuys said that his great-great-grandfather came to where Van Nuys now stands to visit his son when his son was out there on duty on the frontier. And if that is so, he would be probably buried in what we call Old Moss Cemetery. But I want to research that at the archives and Smithsonian this year and see if I can find any actual facts. Then a Caleb Zachary is supposed to be buried over at Fort Gibson, but nobody seems to know anything about it excepting that the man died on the frontier, which was at that time the Indian Territory, out in the territory, they would say. And Mrs. Malloy Ledford says in her book on the history of Johnson County, Arkansas, that he is buried in Fort Gibson. The archive says simply that they know he died in what is now the territory. But that's a clue. And so I do want to see if I can find out for sure where he died and where he's buried. And then at least we'll have 2 Revolutionary soldiers buried in this state.
Were you involved in this bicentennial project to gain, to try to get these Revolutionary War records on microfilm that were being brought statewide?
Yes, we have been.
That's a very fine project.
Yes, it is.
Can you think of, you mentioned the mammoth. Could you tell me when the mammoth was discovered and just how it happened to be discovered and where it is now? Tell that story a little bit more in detail.
All right. In this county, we have sand and sand pits. And they dig the sand up in order to make cement, in order to make roads, and the great sand trucks go by in the summertime especially and lay down quite a layer of dust and dirt, and sometimes we don't like that. But they have uncovered more perhaps animals than the layman is familiar with. So over the years, they have discovered more than 1 mammoth in these sand pits around Latta. I mentioned the fact that the Indians used to come to Latta in order to drink the mineral oil from a mineral slick, it was called long ago, the seepage of that low-grade oil. So perhaps long ago these animals did roam in this area, and we know that they did because they couldn't be here otherwise, and that the oil has formed and that they are buried under a good deal of that area. Yes, I know how it was discovered. A young man came into the laboratory one day and asked to speak with Mr. Hatchett, and he got up from his class and went out in the hall, and he said, "Do you know what this is?" And he had a huge bone in his hand, and Mr. Hatchett said yes, and began telling him what it was. And he said, stopped, and he said, "Where did you find it?" And he said, "At Latta, in one of these sand pits." So that afternoon, Mr. Hatchett took his geology class and his wife and children, because we generally tagged along, and we went out there, and the students dug the mammoth bones up. Took them 4 days. They brought most of those bones into the college, and for a good many years they were in a big cabinet in one of the rooms. After Mr. Hatchett retired, those bones were just bones to someone, and they were carried out of the college, out of the science hall, and dumped. They are not in existence as far as I know today. I have inquired many times about things that Mr. Hatchett had gathered all over this county. But we do not have a good museum at the college. I hope we will have someday, because it is a university and it does need a good museum, which it does not have at the moment.
There is a museum there now, though, isn't
Yes, there is, but it is not the type of a museum that I think the place needs and should have. It will have it.
I wonder why something like, surely they knew they were mammoth bones. Why would they have thrown them away?
I do not know. I suppose every science teacher puts value on certain things, and he does not see value in something that some other teacher did see value in. For instance, Mr. Hatchett had at one time a great many snakes that were endemic in this area. We perhaps had some of the largest rattlers at one time that you could find around. But those snakes are not there now. I don't know why. They just did not feel that they were important. And he had many other animals. In fact, he tried to gather everything in this area that would be of this locality. And he spent 30 years out there trying to build up that museum.
What can you think of any of your personal experiences in teaching your own classes that are of particular interest, some of the highlights or unusual things?
Well, on the early history, I think perhaps the things that the children brought in that actually belonged to Indians at one time intrigued me very much. I knew a good many of the cemeteries at one time that had the burial houses in them, and I tried to teach the children I taught not to deface them, not to go get the food or the plates or the platters or whatever that the food was placed in, and I may have had a little bit of success, I don't know. They brought in many artifacts, which many of which I still have, besides just the Arab points. That was interesting to me. I taught Oklahoma history most of the time that I taught, in the 27 years I taught. And I tried to teach it from the ground up, we might say. And definitely you cannot teach Oklahoma history if you don't know something of the Indians that preceded us and something of the Indians that are still here. I think perhaps that my field trips in science and my field trips in history stand out the most clearly in my mind.
Do you recall among your students any of your students who over the years have made maybe major contributions to the state or community, those some who may have become statewide prominent?
Well, I taught our youngest legislator. If you were around several years ago, I taught Herman Dark, who was the youngest state legislator this state has ever had. He was killed in a car wreck. I taught Bertil Christian, who was our first American ace in the Korean War. And the Christian family asked me to pay the eulogy at his funeral when they brought the body back. He was buried at Maud, from the Maud Church. I thought it was an honor that few women have been given and few teachers have been given. He was a wonderful student, as was his brother and his sister that I also taught in college. I think of those students. I have taught many other students. The Hammond boy, who also was an ace. Then another one of the Hammond boys, the ship was blown out from under him in the Navy during World War II. And as far as teachers are concerned, I could name several that I think are outstanding teachers today in almost a half dozen different science and history fields. Well, let's see, perhaps one that occurs first is a boy named Joe Metashobi, an Indian boy. He teaches or has taught at Bacone. I've taught two other Indian boys that I think were outstanding. One was Joel Maytabi, and I would say they were my two outstanding Indian boys. I've taught two girls that I think are outstanding in homemaking. I didn't teach them homemaking. I did teach them, however, their science, and they are both now married and live in my community. One of them was Pat Tiffin. She was definitely a Patricia Tiffin. She was definitely outstanding. And I think maybe she was the most determined that her grades from first grade through college stay A's, and they did. And now she has two little girls. They're not little, they're good-sized girls who are taking all the honors in the Van Noss area. So that's another generation I didn't teach, but they're certainly following their mother's footsteps in making A's.
What are some of the highlight events that you remember that took place in the Ada area during your lifetime?
I think the development of the college has, of course, fascinated me more than any other. One thing that makes me feel close to the college and the college close to me is that 3 generations of the family have been students at East Central. I myself, my daughter, both of my daughter-in-laws, both of my sons have gotten degrees there, and now my little granddaughter, Teresa Hatchett, is featured twirler with the band, and she's on the honor roll. A dear friend of mine and ours gave to this college $100,000, $50,000 of which is in memory of my husband, Marvin Hatchett. That, of course, meant a lot to me. I think perhaps the second thing that has intrigued me all the way through is the potential in this county that we are just now beginning to develop in many directions, but especially in the direction of education, I think.
Do you recall any that we're talking generally about development, which is real fine? Do you recall any specific getting down to events in Ada, people who have things that have come here, events that have taken place? Do you recall any highlight events, specific events that kind of stand out in your memory?
Well,
I know there are probably many, and it's sometimes difficult to pull one, but and it might not be a big thing. It might be something that was interesting or exciting, although it might not historically have been a big thing.
I believe that I would like to say a thing that could mean something more to us. First, I wish we could have passenger trains through Pontotoc County again. Maybe one of the things that we need most, that I think we are beginning to develop, is the beginnings of more emphasis on culture than we used to have long ago. Now, I can remember very distinctly when Amelia Earhart was here, and I can remember very distinctly when Jessica Dragonette sang here, and Marian Anderson sang here, and many, many others. A beautiful Spaniard boy dancing the bolero. We had, I would say at that time, and that was quite a long time ago, a great deal of what I would call culture. We went through a period of not having all of those things. Now we are turning back to them, and our different musical facilities are growing. We have community, a whole community interest in getting good music here from the world around. And I think, cultural things, again, we're putting emphasis on, and maybe lessening our all-out enthusiasm for sports.
Did you meet Amelia Earhart when she was here?
I did not meet her. I was part of the faculty, other than just to, you know, see her and nod and smile at a reception that was given for her.
What about Marion Anderson? Did you
I did not meet them. I tell you someone who did. Oscar Parker entertained all of the great singers here and musicians who came during that period of time when the college under Dr. Linscheid spent so much of its time having beautiful programs of the kind. And Oscar could talk, I suspect, hours and hours and hours on the cultural aspect of the college and its influence at that time.
What was his position? What was he?
He was the head of the finance department at that time.
What's the student enrollment now?
I couldn't tell you exactly what it is. When I first came here, we were less than 1,000.
Would it run 8,000 or 10,000 now?
I would be afraid to say. I should know, but I just do not know.
What to you has been the most exciting thing in your life?
The most exciting thing in my life, well, perhaps it was the last time I went by air to visit my daughter, and that doesn't have anything to do with Pontotoc County. And I was sitting in, I had to change at Denver, and I was sitting waiting for my plane, and it dawned on me that I had sat and read a book and let the plane go away and leave me. So I dashed up to the ticket girl, and I said, my flight hasn't been called. And she said, oh, no, it hasn't. They'll call it in a minute. And I said, but it's past time. And she said, yes, I know, but they'll call it in a minute. And sure enough, after a little bit, they called it, and I got on the plane and I settled down to finish the book that was so exciting. And when I got to Reno, my daughter was walking the floor and crying and having a fit. I ran up to her and I said, Sarah June Hatchett, what in the world's the matter with you? And she said, oh, Mother, there's a bomb on your plane. And I said, well, I'm not on that plane anymore. And she finally hushed crying, but I did not know there was a bomb on that plane.
Did they actually find a bomb, or
they
was
never,
it a threat?
It was a threat. If they found it, they certainly never told us.
Most bomb threats, there's not one. Of course, they can't take a chance,
But I suspect in Ada, one of the most exciting things, I was in the college science hall and waiting for Mr. Hatchett to get through whatever he was doing in order that we might go home, and they informed us that the building was on fire. We should have been able to have detected it because at the time he had 14 boxes of rattlesnakes and they were all singing, and I said, when did you feed them last? Oh, he said they'd been fed. There wasn't anything wrong with them. Besides, they didn't eat very much that time of the year. And then we smelled smoke, and we began getting out of the building in a hurry. And when we got out of the building, the firemen were getting out also, and they said, Mr. Hatchett, will you please have students to remove those rattlesnakes? We're afraid to fight the fire in your laboratory. It was an exciting moment. Maybe not the most exciting moment in my life, but it was exciting.
I believe was it the oldest tree in the state that's here in Ada area? Is it the oldest or the biggest or something?
Geologically, it is the largest of its type. Now, at one time, Mr. Hatchett and I and our children lived east of Ada. And at that time, we lived very close to a petrified forest. Most people do not know that Ada has a little petrified forest, but we did. And if that had petrified wood had not been picked up and put in buildings that you will see here and there in the county, there would still be a petrified forest here. Down around the lake you can find even yet outcroppings of the ancient fern trees like the one on the campus. Yes, this one was the largest. Now, it is no older than perhaps most of them of the similar type. It was named, of course, put there in honor of one of the great geologists, and it was done during the time Mr. Hatchett was the head of the science department, but actually a geologist had more to do with it than the college did, per se, I might say, and that was John Fitz, and he was an oil geologist that brought in the Fitz field, oil field.
Who are some of the notable people around Ada that you may have known? Did you know Robert S. Kerr?
Yes.
Why don't you talk about him as you remember?
I remember him as a young man best, and perhaps something that many people have forgotten. I was in school here as a student when Bob Kerr's first wife died. To tell a little story about it, I don't know what ever happened to the girls, but we had a teacher that she could mock. He had a Mississippi brogue. He came in and he said, "We will be turning school out today. Mrs. Kerr passed away." When we walked out of the science building, Fern Garner was her name. Fern was mocking Dr. Davis, and she said those identical words, and Dr. Davis stepped around in front of us and he says, "Uh-huh, and when the funeral's over, I expect you back in classes." So Fern didn't expect to get a grade, but she did. I remember, of course, Bob Kerr, as most people remember him from there on, as a politician, and I think a good one, as a friend to the town of Ada, and a good friend to the town of Ada. I have been to his home over not too far from where I was born, incidentally. I was born at Howe in LaFleur County, and his home, of course, is a little northeast of there. I have been there twice only, but I also remember him when he lived with his first wife in the bungalow here in Ada. I remember very well and knew quite well Ada Himmler. She was born Ada Reed, and Ada, Oklahoma was named for her.
Tell about her.
I remember better as a young person, and then after she married, I did not know her for quite a few years. Then after we organized the Historical Society, we became very interested in all the facts of her life, so I got from her family Bible to preserve the records, and we talked a great long time about her and her family. I think perhaps the outstanding thing I remember about her is her intense interest in Ada. As it had grown, it was a little hard to pull out of her some of the things that she remembered as a child, but she did talk about the Reed store, and you will be hearing much more about that after a bit. She talked a lot about the people who were here and who were not here when they came here. And I got very interested in the old cemetery. In fact, I think I didn't know that the cemetery over on Hickory was there until I talked with her. And it is a cemetery right in Ada. Later, the Historical Society, and this was while I was president of it, started the publication of the cemeteries in this county until we published 5 volumes. Then I copied the Memorial Cemetery, and then the Historical Society within the last 2 years has published the 6th book of cemeteries in this county, a thing that most people do not know, but that just about covers our county as far as cemeteries are concerned.
How did the town happen to be named after Ada Reed? I mean, why did they name it? She was a young child.
She was a child, but her father was the postmaster and submitted her name along with several other names. And for some reason it appealed to the postal department, and they chose the name Ada for the town. She was a young girl at the time, of course.
Jack Kahn has become quite prominent as the former national president of the Bankers Association. Did you know him?
Yes, from 1918 on,
right?
pretty much I knew him. I knew him as a banker here. I knew, of course, a little bit about his background, his home.
Tell some things about him.
Well, the most I could say about him was that he was a young boy who was adopted. He had in their family a colored woman who took care of the family. After his family died, she continued to look after him and pretty much served as maybe papa and mama for the young boy until, of course, he was grown, and he always was a big enough man to appreciate the fact that a colored person had gone all out to take care of him. I think he's quite a wonderful person to have paid tribute where tribute was due.
He was chairman of Oklahoma City's bicentennial program, and a very fine one.
That is correct.
Do you think of any other Ada people? Wes Watkins is the new. He's from Ada, isn't he?
Yes.
And he's the new representative, replaced Carl Albert. Did you ever know him or have him in place?
No, I did not. Of course, I've known him very well within the last recent years because I, of course, take a little part in politics in the county. I knew Carl Albert as a schoolboy is a thing that I don't often tell. It certainly dates me, but I was teaching in McAllister I'd taught there 4 years when I married Mr. Hatchett. That puts me back in the, I went there in 1924, 25, 26, and nearly 5 years. And married from there in 28, and married there in McAllister. He was in high school during that period of time and went on to college during that period of time, and I knew Carl Albert as a young boy, and he knew me at that time.
Do you recall anything about him, any incidents, anything?
Yes, I do. I can remember that he was brilliant, as everybody knows, but it showed. And I think most teachers, nevertheless, can forgive that in a young man. We like, or woman, we like students that are brilliant and know they're brilliant and work at it. And he definitely did. But I remember another thing about him. At that time, my name was Chanel, and he began to call me Channel, which of course it is, and he got to call me Channel Cat. And from Crabs, and as you know, he lived between McAllister and Crabs, was my best friend, whose name was Fish. And so he had a lot of fun calling me Channel Cat and her They Fish. Now, I don't know why, but he did. He just thought it was funny. And that I remember. I taught math in high school at that time. I hadn't been inoculated with the science bug, and I did not teach him because he did not take class with me. In fact, he was a senior and I was teaching math in ninth and 10th. But I did know him. I saw him on the school grounds, of course, often the first year I taught there. And the rest of the time I'd see him only when he came home to McAllister. But I did know him as a boy, and I thought he was going somewhere even then.
You think of anything else we ought to talk about?
Well, not unless it would almost have to be in genealogy, and I think very few people are interested in genealogy.
Well, of course, genealogy is, lots of people are interested in, except that it's not an oral thing. It's not. It's not an oral study. It's a paper study, basically.
It certainly is.
Well, we've certainly been an interesting interview with Mrs. M.P. Hatchett, and we of Ada, Oklahoma, and we have enjoyed this very much.